Hello, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this kind of historical storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. How does a submarine scream when no one can hear it? What really happens inside a steel coffin 200 meters beneath the sea? If help was so close, why do we still die? And a question that still burns inside me, even now. Were we already dead long before the world knew our names? I remember the first sound. It was not an explosion. Not at first. It was a dull, hollow thud like a giant fist knocking on the hull from the outside. A sound so deep it vibrated through my bones before my ears understood it. I was standing near the aft section, one hand gripping a metal rail, the other holding a mug of lukewarm tea. The sea had been calm that morning. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes sailors uneasy, even beneath thousands of tons of water. The Kursk had been moving. Silently, confidently. She was the pride of the Northern Fleet. A monster of steel, nuclear-powered, unsinkable. At least that was what we were told. I believed it. We all did. The second sound came. Seconds later. This one was different. Sharper. Violent. It slammed through the submarine like a hammer, striking a bell. The lights flickered. The floor tilted beneath my boots. My tea mug flew from my hand and shattered against the wall, its fragments scattering like shrapnel. Someone shouted. Someone else swore. Somewhere forward, metal screamed as if being torn apart by invisible hands. Then the Kursk stopped. Not slowed. Not drifted. Stopped. The sudden stillness was terrifying. A submarine is never meant to stop like that. Not in the depths. Not without warning. The engines fell. Silent. Replaced by an eerie groan echoing through the hull. It sounded like the ship itself was in pain. I tasted metal in my mouth. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Collision, someone yelled. No, another voice answered, shaky. No way. There's nothing out here. We were deep beneath the Barents Sea, participating in a naval exercise. Torpedoes had been loaded earlier that morning. Practice torpedoes, they said. Routine. Routine is the most dangerous word at sea. The intercom crackled, then died. Emergency lights glowed dim red, bathing the compartment in shadows. Faces around me were pale, eyes wide, searching for answers that no one could give. Then came the third sound. This one erased all doubt. A massive explosion tore through the forward sections of the submarine. The force threw me off my feet and slammed me against the bulkhead. Pain exploded in my ribs. The air was ripped from my lungs as if the sea itself had punched me. The Kursk shook violently. Metal buckled. Pipes burst overhead, spraying steam and water. The temperature spiked instantly, then dropped just as fast. Screams echoed through the compartments. Raw, terrified, human. And then, silence again. Not the calm kind. The kind that follows something irreversible. I lay on the floor, gasping, my ears ringing so loudly I couldn't hear my own breathing. Somewhere, alarms wailed weakly before dying mid-cry. The red lights flickered, then steadied. I pushed myself up, my hands slick with something warm. Blood. Not mine, I hoped. The forward compartments were gone. I didn't need instruments to tell me that. I could feel it in the way the submarine had settled. Nose down, heavy, like a wounded animal sinking to the seabed. We had hit bottom. I didn't know how deep we were. 200 meters? More? It didn't matter. At that depth, the sea presses down with the weight of a mountain. One crack, one failure, and we would be crushed in an instant. Damage report, someone shouted into the darkness. No response. I stumbled toward the aft, stepping over twisted metal and debris. Men were moving, some limping, some crawling, some not moving at all. The smell hit me next. Smoke, oil, burnt metal, and something else I didn't want to identify. Death has a smell. You never forget it once you've known it. We gathered instinctively in the rear compartments. Survivors gravitate toward each other, even without orders. It's not discipline, it's fear. Someone counted heads. Too few. Way too few. The reactor, thankfully, was still stable. That knowledge spread like a weak but necessary medicine. If the reactor failed, there would be no waiting, no hoping. just instant annihilation. But stability didn't mean safety. Oxygen levels were already dropping. Carbon dioxide was rising. Emergency systems were damaged. Batteries had limited power. Time, whatever amount we had, was bleeding away. We tried the radio. Nothing. We tried internal communications. Dead. We tried knocking on the hull, sending coded signals. Talp, talp, talp. No answer. That was when the thought crept. In quiet, poisonous. Does anyone know we're down here? Above us. The exercise would have continued. Missile fired. Ships maneuvering. Officers watching screens, confident in their steel beasts. Beneath the waves. We were supposed to surface later that day. But we didn't. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time became meaningless in the red-lit steel box. Sweat trickled down my spine despite the cold. My hands shook, not from injury, but from the realization settling in my chest. We were trapped, not just physically, strategically, politically. We were sailors in one of the most powerful navies in the world, but at the bottom of the sea, power means nothing. Rank means nothing. Flags mean nothing. Only air matters. Only time. Someone started praying softly in the corner. Someone else cursed the torpedoes. Another man sat staring at his hands, opening and closing his fingers as if testing whether he still existed. I leaned against the hull, pressing my helmeted head to the cold steel. Somewhere beyond that metal was the ocean, black, endless, crushing. Somewhere above that, sunlight danced on the waves. And somewhere far above that, people lived their normal lives. Did they hear us yet? Did they feel something was wrong? Or were we already forgotten, even as we still breathed? I try not to think about my family, about my mother's voice, about the letter I hadn't finished writing. Hope is dangerous in confined spaces. It expands until it suffocates you. Instead, I focused on procedure, on training, on the lie that preparation could save us from everything. We sealed compartments. We rationed oxygen. We waited. Every few minutes, we knocked again on the hull. Talp, talp, talp. Each knock was a question sent into the void. Are you there? Are you coming? Are we already too late? No answer came back. Only the distant creak of metal under pressure. Only the slow, invisible tightening of the sea around us. And that was when I realized something far worse than the explosions, worse than the darkness, worse than the cold. We were alive, which meant we still had time to understand what was happening. And understanding, in moments like this, is sometimes the cruelest thing of all. I remember the moment when time stopped pretending to move forward. After the first explosion, nothing felt real anymore. Sound vanished first. Not silence, something heavier, like the ocean itself, pressing against my ears from the inside. The metal around us groaned, not loudly, but with a deep, wounded voice, as if the submarine had become a living creature struggling to breathe. Lights flickered once, twice, and then surrendered to darkness. Emergency red lamps replaced the familiar glow, bathing everything in a dim, pulsating crimson. Training told us to act. Instinct told us to freeze. I forced myself to move. My hands found the bulkhead, fingers trembling as they traced the cold steel. The air smelled wrong, burnt oil, scorched insulation, and something metallic that tasted like blood when I inhaled. Men were shouting, but their voices came distorted, stretched, swallowed by the narrow corridors and the damage already spreading through. The hull. The Kursk was wounded but not dead. Not yet. The first reports came fast and incomplete. Compartment 1 was gone, completely destroyed. Anyone stationed there did not die slowly. That was the only mercy the sea allowed that day. The second explosion followed shortly after the first, far more powerful, sealing the fate of the forward sections. We did not need instruments to tell us what had happened. The pressure, the angle, the way the deck tilted beneath our boots, it all spoke clearly. We were sinking. When the submarine finally struck the seabed, it did not crash. It settled. That was worse. The Kursk lay down on the ocean floor, as if exhausted, tilted slightly to starboard, 108 meters below the surface. Above us was the Barents Sea. Above that, The world continued without knowing we were already ghosts. We regrouped where we could. Compartment 9 became our last refuge. 23 of us survived the initial catastrophe and found our way there, moving through flooded corridors, past twisted metal and floating debris, past bodies we did not stop to look at. Not because we did not care, but because stopping meant dying. Inside Compartment 9, the air was thin but breathable. We sealed the hatch behind us, the sound of the locking mechanism echoing like a final sentence. Someone counted heads. Someone else prayed. Quietly, I leaned against the wall and tried to slow my breathing, knowing oxygen was no longer something we could afford to waste. We waited for orders that never came. The emergency systems were partially functional. Batteries still held power, but not enough. The temperature dropped steadily, the cold seeping through steel walls, creeping into bones. Condensation formed and froze, turning the interior into a cave of ice and shadows. Water continued to leak in, slow and patient, as if the scene knew it had all the time in the world. We understood the truth quickly, even if no one said it aloud. Rescue was uncertain. Communication with the surface was gone. The Kursk had not sent a distress signal. From above, it would look like a temporary loss of contact. During an exercise, nothing unusual, nothing urgent. I remember thinking how fragile the boundary between routine and disaster really was. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost its shape. We rotated positions to conserve energy, sitting, standing, lying down on the cold deck. Some men tried to keep spirits alive, speaking about families, about shore leave, about food they missed. Others withdrew into silence, staring at nothing. I wrote. The pencil felt heavy in my hand. My fingers were stiff, but writing gave me purpose. I documented who was with us, our condition, the time as best as I could estimate. Not because I believed someone would read it soon, but because history deserved the truth, even if it arrived too late. The note was not dramatic. It was factual, calm. That calmness came not from bravery, but from acceptance. Panic wastes air. Fear accelerates the end. Discipline was the last thing the Navy had given us, and we held on to it. As oxygen thinned, another enemy appeared, carbon monoxide. The emergency oxygen generators were activated, but one of them malfunctioned. When it touched seawater, it ignited. The fire was brief, but lethal. Flames flashed white-hot, consuming oxygen instantly, releasing toxic gases. Men closest to it collapsed without a sound. We learned then that survival was no longer collective. It became individual, moment to moment, breath by breath. I remember the weight of darkness pressing on my thoughts. The cold was no longer sharp. It became distant, almost comforting. Hands and feet lost feeling. Muscles weakened. Speech slowed. Some men slipped into unconsciousness, their breathing shallow, barely visible. Above us, rescue operations had finally begun, but we did not know that. Russian rescue vessels arrived first, but their equipment failed. The docking systems could not attach properly to the Kursk's escape hatch. Attempts were made again and again, each one unsuccessful. Weather worsened. The sea did what it always does. It reminded humans who truly ruled it. Days passed. By the time foreign assistance was accepted, it was already too late. Norwegian and British divers reached the submarine, opened the hatch, and found only water. Compartment 9 had flooded completely. The last of us had died hours, perhaps days, before help arrived. I did not feel anger in my final moments. That surprised me. There was no rage toward command, no hatred toward fate. Only a quiet sadness and an overwhelming awareness of how small a human life is. Against steel, water, and silence. I thought of my mother, of ordinary mornings, of sunlight reflecting off calm water, unaware of the darkness beneath. The Kursk became a grave not because of war, but because of secrecy, pride, and delay. The ocean did not kill us alone. Human decisions played their part, quietly, efficiently. When the submarine was eventually raised from the seabed, the world finally saw what we already knew. The explosions, the fire, the notes, the truth written in graphite and frozen in time. I was no longer there to see it, but the silence we left behind still speaks. I did not understand the cause of our death while it was happening. Down in the darkness, we only felt the consequences, the violence, the collapse, the silence that followed. It was only later, through reports, investigations, and fragments of truth, that the full picture emerged. By then, I was no longer alive to feel vindicated or betrayed. But understanding matters. Even after death, the Kursk did not sink because of an external enemy. No torpedo struck us from another nation. No collision with a foreign submarine occurred. The destroyer came from within. Quiet at first, hidden behind procedures that had been accepted for years without question. The weapon that doomed us was one we carried ourselves. The Type 65-76, a torpedo, was a powerful instrument, fueled by high-test peroxide. On paper, it was devastating. In practice, it was unstable, unforgiving, and dangerously outdated. This fuel reacted violently with organic materials, metals, even microscopic contaminants. A small leak was not a malfunction, it was a death sentence. Inside the torpedo room, a microscopic crack allowed fuel to escape. It contacted copper components. Heat rose. Pressure followed. There was no dramatic warning. No heroic final action. Chemistry did what it always does when ignored. The first explosion was the torpedo detonating itself. The second explosion, far larger, came when several warheads stored nearby detonated sympathetically. That blast was equivalent to several tons of TNT. It tore through the forward compartments, crushed bulkheads designed to withstand battle, and sent a shockwave through the submarine that no structure could survive intact. From that moment, the Kursk was already a corpse drifting downward. What followed was not an accident. It was a chain reaction born from decisions made years earlier. The continued use of peroxide-fueled torpedoes despite known risks. The lack of modern safety protocols. The normalization of danger through routine. Everyone knew these weapons were temperamental. Everyone had learned to work around that truth rather than confront it. That culture killed us. Maintenance records were incomplete. Training drills had become rehearsed performances rather than genuine preparedness. Safety warnings were quietly downgraded so exercises could proceed without delay. The Kursk was meant to be a symbol of post-Soviet naval strength. Symbols are not allowed to fail publicly. So flaws were hidden. Risks were accepted. Silence was rewarded. After the sinking, that same silence rose to the surface. The Russian Navy did not immediately announce the disaster. For days, official statements insisted we were communicating that rescue was underway. But there was hope. Families were told nothing definitive. The truth was delayed not by confusion, but by control. Foreign assistance was initially refused. This decision did not come from malice. It came from pride, from a long-ingrained instinct to handle matters internally, to avoid revealing weaknesses, to protect military secrecy at any cost. Admitting the need for help meant admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability in that system was treated as a greater threat than death. By the time outside help was accepted, the sea had already finished its work. Investigations that followed confirmed what we had lived. The explosion, the fire, the slow suffocation. The final note found in compartment 9. Written calmly, clearly, without hysteria. That note became inconvenient. It proved survival had been possible. That men had lived long enough to be rescued. That time, not fate, had been the true enemy. And time had been wasted. Responsibility was diluted. Through bureaucracy, no single hand signed our death warrant. Instead, many hands passed the pen, each adding a small stroke. Procurement decisions, training shortcuts, command hesitations, political calculations. Individually, none seemed fatal. Together, they sank a submarine. When the Kursk was raised from the seabed, the hull told its story more honestly than any official report. The torn metal, the burned patterns, the deformed torpedo tubes. Physics does not lie. Steel remembers. The Navy quietly retired peroxide-fueled torpedoes afterward. New safety standards were introduced. Rescue protocols were revised. International cooperation agreements were signed. These changes were written in our names. I do not consider this justice. Justice implies balance. Nothing balances 23 men suffocating in darkness while the world debated optics. But I recognize the pattern. History improves not through foresight, but through loss. The Kursk became a lesson only because it became a grave. From my perspective, the most devastating realization was not the explosion itself. It was how preventable it all was. The disaster did not require heroism to stop. It required honesty, acknowledgement, the courage to admit that something powerful was also dangerous. That courage was missing. In death, we became symbols. In life, we were ignored variables. I carry no bitterness now, only clarity. The sea did not betray us. Machines did not betray us. People did, quietly, systematically, with good intentions and fatal compromises. The Kursk rests on the ocean floor no longer, but its echo remains. In every submarine drill, in every safety checklist rewritten, in every decision where convenience tempts silence. That echo is our voice, and it will speak long after the steel has rusted away. Death did not end our story. In many ways, it was only the beginning. When the Kursk disappeared beneath the Barents Sea, the explosion killed our bodies. But what followed on the surface tore through institutions, reputations, and illusions that had survived long after the Cold War ended. We became more than sailors. We became a mirror, and many did not like what they saw reflected back at them. At first, the country did not mourn us. It waited. Official channels spoke cautiously, carefully. Language became padded, vague, conditional. Words like incident, situation, contact lost. Nothing definitive. Nothing human. Our families were not told we were dead. They were told we were unreachable. Hope was not extended for compassion. It was extended to buy time. Inside Naval Command rooms, calculations were being made that had nothing to do with oxygen levels or pressure tolerances. There were calculations about optics, authority, and control, about how much could be admitted without appearing weak, about how much silence could be maintained before it turned into suspicion. The delay in accepting international help was not merely a technical decision. It was ideological. For decades, the Navy had been trained to see foreign involvement as intrusion, not assistance. Accepting help meant allowing outsiders to touch classified equipment, to see design flaws, to witness vulnerability firsthand. That fear outweighed our lives. By the time foreign rescue teams were allowed near the wreck, the truth had already settled into the steel compartments where we had waited. Their submersibles descended not to save us, but to confirm what silence had already ensured. When the confirmation came, grief finally surfaced. But grief came tangled with anger. Families demanded answers. Mothers demanded accountability. Wives demanded truth. They did not receive it cleanly. Press conferences became performances. Officials stood behind microphones and spoke of unavoidable tragedy, of heroic effort, of impossible conditions. Very few spoke of delay. Very few spoke of refusal. And almost none spoke of responsibility. The media fractured into two paths. State-aligned outlets repeated official narratives, emphasizing bravery, unity, and inevitability. Independent journalists pushed harder. They asked about timelines, about decisions, about the note found in the ninth compartment. That note was dangerous. It proved that some of us had survived the initial explosion, that we had organized ourselves, that we had waited. That rescue was not a fantasy. It was a possibility that expired slowly. So the note was framed carefully. Its emotional weight was acknowledged, but its implications were softened. It became a symbol of courage, not evidence of failure. Symbols are safer than facts. As weeks passed, the Kursk transformed from a military disaster into a political burden. Public trust wavered, not because people expected perfection, but because they sensed concealment. Silence creates more damage than catastrophe ever could. The leadership responded by tightening messaging. Apologies were delayed, then measured, then wrapped in abstractions. Responsibility became collective, which meant it belonged to no one. No court-martial followed. No high-ranking dismissal followed. The system absorbed the loss and moved forward intact, like a whole compartment sealed after flooding. Functional, unchanged. Yet beneath that surface, something shifted. Inside the Navy, officers began to speak. Differently, quietly, privately. Training manuals were revised. Weapon systems were reevaluated. Rescue capabilities were reconsidered. International cooperation, once unthinkable, became negotiable. These changes were never officially attributed to us, but they bore our fingerprints. Our deaths rewrote procedures that could not be rewritten by argument alone. For the families, however, procedural reform was not closure. Some found solace in memorials, others in silence. Others never forgave. They lived with a permanent double vision, one eye on the past, one on unanswered questions. Their grief did not resolve. It hardened. I watched all of this from a place without time. From there, the contradiction became clear. Nations claim to honor their dead, but they fear the truths those dead reveal. We were praised publicly and avoided structurally. Our names were engraved, but our lessons were selectively learned. The Kursk became a reference point rather than a reckoning. In international circles, the disaster was discussed more openly. Naval analysts cited it as an example of post-Soviet transitional weakness. Engineers cited it as a warning about legacy. Systems. Diplomats cited it as evidence of the dangers of isolation. We were studied, but study does not equal understanding. Understanding requires humility, and humility is expensive. Years later, documentaries would be made, books would be written, reconstructions would be animated. Each version claimed to reveal what really happened. None fully could, not because facts were unavailable, but because motives are harder to diagram than explosions. The most important failure was not technical. It was cultural. A culture that equated secrecy with strength. A culture that punished bad news. A culture that valued control over correction. That culture did not die with us. It weakened, but it endured. Every time an institution chooses image over transparency, it echoes the decisions that sealed our fate. The Kursk is often remembered as a singular tragedy. It was not. It was a symptom, a moment when accumulated compromises finally demanded payment. And payment was extracted in human breath. I do not speak now to accuse. Accusation is loud and fleeting. I speak to record, to ensure that memory does not flatten into mythology. We were not heroes by design. We were professionals caught inside a system that mistook endurance for safety. Our legacy should not be statues or anniversaries. It should be interruption. Interruption of complacency. Interruption of silence. Interruption of the belief that strength requires concealment. If the Kursk is remembered only as a tragic loss, then it failed twice, once in the sea and once in memory. If it is remembered as a warning, then some part of us continues to serve. I remain what I was in life, a sailor, not a symbol, not a martyr, a witness. And witnesses speak, even when they are no longer heard by ears. I have had a long time to think. Time stretches differently when it no longer measures hours or days. It becomes reflection. It becomes distance. It becomes clarity without mercy. From this distance, I no longer feel fear or pain. What remains is understanding, and understanding is heavier than either. When the sea finally closed above us, the world moved on, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. News cycles ended. Officials returned to routine. Other disasters arrived to replace us in the public mind. That is not cruelty. That is how time works. It demands succession, but memory does not disappear. It sinks, and like anything sunk, it waits to be disturbed. Years after the Kursk, new submarines were built. New doctrines were written. New leaders stood before flags and spoke of modernization and lessons learned. I watched these changes not with bitterness, but with caution. Progress that refuses to name its cost is fragile. It cracks under pressure. We were often described as victims of an accident. That word is convenient. An accident suggests randomness, inevitability, misfortune without authorship. But the Kursk was not random. It was assembled from decisions made long before we ever submerged. Decisions about funding, about maintenance, about training, about what could be postponed without consequence. Every institution makes such decisions. Most are never tested at depth. Ours were. I think often of the younger sailors among us. Some were barely older than boys. They trusted the vessel. They trusted the chain of command. They trusted the silence that surrounded them, believing it meant competence rather than concealment. Trust is the most fragile material in any machine. Once it fractures, nothing holds properly again. Our families carried that fracture into their lives. Some learned to live around it. Some never did. They aged with unanswered questions, with sentences that ended abruptly, with birthdays that felt like interruptions rather than celebrations. They were told to be proud. Pride does not answer why help was delayed. Pride does not refill oxygen. Pride does not reopen sealed hatches. I do not speak this to dishonor service. I speak it to restore proportion. Service deserves honesty, not ceremony alone. The Kursk taught the world something uncomfortable, that modern technology does not erase old habits. A nation can inherit new equipment while retaining old reflexes. Steel evolves faster than culture. Silence, when institutionalized, becomes lethal. I have watched other disasters unfold since then. Different nations, different flags, different circumstances, and still the pattern repeats. Initial denial, controlled language, delayed acknowledgement, gradual admission framed as inevitability. We are never as unique as we believe. What separates tragedy from legacy is not scale. It is response. Some of what followed us was change. Real change. Rescue cooperation improved. International exercises became more common. Safety systems were redesigned. These things matter. They save lives we will never know. But change without memory is temporary. Memory without honesty is useless. If I could speak directly to those who still serve beneath the sea, I would not tell them of fear. Fear paralyzes. I would tell them a question, to demand clarity, to understand that professionalism includes refusal, the refusal to accept silence as reassurance. Submarines are built on trust. Trust in engineering, trust in command, trust in the unseen. When that trust is betrayed, the ocean is unforgiving. I remain proud of my crew, not because we died, but because, in our final hours, we did what sailors do. We organized. We rationed. We documented. We waited, not blindly, but with discipline. We did not descend into chaos. We did not abandon procedure. That matters. It proves that the failure did not come from us. When the Kursk was eventually raised, it became an artifact, a physical object to be inspected, photographed, analyzed. But the most important, remains were never lifted. They stayed embedded in institutional memory, in quiet revisions, in conversations that never reached microphones. Those remains are harder to preserve. Over time, the story of the Kursk will continue to simplify. It will be compressed into timelines, into diagrams, into short summaries suitable for education and media. That is unavoidable. Complexity resists transmission, but I hope one thing resists compression. The truth that disaster is rarely a single moment. It is a process, a gradual narrowing of options until none remain. A sequence of small decisions that seem reasonable until they intersect catastrophically. The Kursk was not sunk by one explosion alone. It was sunk by habits. If there's a final responsibility that belongs to the dead, it is this, to insist that the living remember accurately. Not comfortably, not patriotically, but accurately. We do not need to be glorified. We need to be understood. I do not ask for monuments, stone weathers, names fade. I ask for interruption, for moments when future leaders pause before choosing secrecy, before delaying help, before prioritizing image over life. If that pause exists, then some part of us still breathes. I was a sailor of the Kursk. I served, I descended, I waited. I did not return, but my story did not end at the seabed. It continues, wherever truth is chosen over silence. And that is where I remain.